Counting is wonderful, counting is marvelous, counting's terrific and how.
Hello everyone, I'm Captain Logan. Welcome back to Counting Kryptofreaks. Are you ready to count stuff again? I sure am. I'm very excited because today, even though we have a huge number of categories to count, we also have a really good episode. This is one of those rare times where an episode with a whole lot of the regular tropes, stuff to count, is also one of the better episodes of the season, and dare I say even of the whole series. Today we're taking a look at episode 8 of season 3. It's Shattered, which is the Lex Luthor psychotic break episode where we're supposed to wonder the whole episode if he is actually losing his mind or if Lex has been drugged by his father to make sure that he's not believed when he starts to tell people and show evidence of Lionel's having murdered his family as a child in a tenement fire. And it's pretty clear, I think, pretty early which of those things it ends up being, which is a little bit of a misstep, but we'll talk, or earlier than I want it to be, but we'll talk about it. This is, I think, Michael Rosenbaum's maybe best performance in the whole show, or at least it's way up there. If I had to make a top 5 list of those, this would almost certainly rank in the top 3, and I'm really excited to get to talk about it with you today. We had a really boring, mediocre episode last time that I didn't have very much to talk about. That was a kind of standard Kryptofreak episode that interrupted the less formulaic episodes we've had this season, and now we're back to some character stuff. So we kind of have 3 kinds of episodes this season. We've got the really traditional Freak of the Week stuff, and then we have more character-driven, sort of character study episodes, and then we have the Kryptonian mythology heavy stuff. And this is in the second category, although is sort of a mythology episode in the sense that it is continuing on the Lex Luthor, Lionel Luthor plot that has been building this whole season, giving us little tidbits about Lex's past and about how Lionel built up his wealth and all of that. So let's go ahead and get right into it. If you want to watch it with me, and I encourage you to do so, get out your DVDs or your Blu-rays, or you can watch this still on Hulu. If you are so inclined, you should get to timestamp 0 and make sure that you're watching Shattered and not some other episode, and get ready to press play when I say now. Remember, if you're watching on Hulu, there are commercials, so if you're not paying for the commercial-less version, so you'll want to pause in between, you'll want to pause me in between commercial breaks. Here we go. Let's go ahead and get started. Everybody, please press play right now. So right away, we're going to open up showing us what happened to Morgan Edge, who we were led to believe died a few episodes back. Of course, Clark was working for Morgan Edge when he was on Green Kryptonite at the beginning of the season. Morgan Edge, who was played by Rutger Hauer and is a mob boss in Metropolis who used to be best friends with Lionel Luthor, and they still keep in touch, but of course only for mutual benefit. I'm reminded, of course, of Batman 89 in this season. Mirror! Mirror! And it's a similar sort of situation where he's had plastic surgery, although not because he's been made to look like a clown after dropping into a vat of acid, but because we couldn't get the actor back. Rutger Hauer wasn't available, so we have this contrived, concocted way to recast. When I think maybe he could have just been recast and we don't talk about it, although I don't think the show ever really does that, with the exception of like Jor-El and Lex. Like, there are places where we recast, but there's kind of a like attempted built-in character reason for it, just like we do here. So I guess at least we're consistent with that. This is silly. This is really preposterous. Not any more preposterous than anything else this show does. And not a thing that the producers wanted to do. Originally, the plan was to bring Rutger Hauer back, but apparently he had family business in Europe and couldn't be there, so we came up with this half-baked way, again, to recast him. And I like that the episode is so self-aware about how silly this is. We're going to have a scene a little bit later where Jonathan's going to say, oh, really? He's, Morgan Edge is back, and he's had plastic surgery. I love John Schneider's delivery of that. It's hilarious. And it's what I like about it is that Kenneth Biller, the writer of this episode, and I can't believe, by the way, that he wrote one of the best episodes of the series, because generally speaking, Kenneth Biller is not a great writer, and certainly not a great showrunner of things. He did the last season of Star Trek Voyager, and it's really bad. He just was not ready to run a show. I don't know if he ever ran anything later. Maybe he was better. I say he's not a good showrunner. He wasn't good for that. But anyway, I tend to kind of boo when I see his name, but this is a Kenneth Miller script, and I gotta hand it to him. It's really good. He probably didn't break this story all by himself, but I mean, he wrote it, he wrote the dialogue, and it's a pretty good episode. But anyway, so Kenneth Miller kind of takes this opportunity to use this really silly, half-baked thing with Morgan Edge as yet another example of a thing that makes Lex look crazy, because he's going around saying, and we're going to see this happen in a minute, there's this conspiracy against me, I had to run away from my own, staff at the mansion, and I jumped through a window, and then the next day it doesn't seem like any of those things happen, and then he's talking about this whole thing with Morgan Edge, and then he actually is going to start hallucinating and seeing things like his baby brother Julian, and he's going to look like he really has had a psychotic break. And so with this, necessary contrivance to bring in another actor to do Morgan Edge, I guess you could have just not had Morgan Edge, but it's a way for Lex to get that evidence. I'm not sure exactly how else he would have that, and that was set up earlier in the season, so that's good. But that does give, that does create some cannon fodder against Lex as looking like a crazy person. So I like that it's used for that. Such a nice sense of urgency throughout this entire episode. If you watch the last episode and you go right into this, it's night and day. It feels like a completely different show. We're taking ourselves so much more seriously here, but not so seriously that we can't have fun with the absurdity of some of what happens here. I say he's running from his own staff. I forgot that it seems to be that it's just these people dressed in black, wearing masks. But I misremembered that because we'll find out later that his security guard, Darius, is actually in on it the whole time, which is a reveal that I don't love, like I said, but I'll talk about that here in a little bit. I think that's a fantastic teaser. I don't know how anybody would want to keep watching after that. Man, Lex just has the worst luck, doesn't he? I was, when this first aired, I was a little bit surprised and a little perplexed that we get to this as quickly as we do, because it was only last episode that we teamed up Lex and Chloe in trying to unravel this conspiracy with Lionel, and then ultimately, like I would have figured, I mean, we've got like 22 episode seasons in this show. Actually, I think it's 22 all the way up until right at the end. But we've got 22 episode seasons for this show, and already we've got Lionel fighting back against this, and we've already got Lex finding this evidence. But I guess that makes sense though, because the last episode they have just teamed up, but Chloe brings him the Morgan Edge thing. So I guess it is kind of nice that we don't stretch and we don't take a lot of time on it. At the same time, I don't know exactly how Lex found Morgan Edge. That was a question I found myself asking. I guess that's a question to ask Jarrell when I get to heaven for this episode. How exactly did Lex know where Morgan Edge was? Furthermore, wasn't the timing really convenient that he walks into that room just after Edge gets his plastic surgery? Like, seconds after he looks like a different man, Lex walks in. Like he timed it, right? And Lex, as I always say, is great at dramatic entrances, but that timing is insane. And Morgan Edge turns around and hilariously goes, well, I don't know who you're talking about. I'm not, look at me, I'm not Rutger Hauer, I'm clearly some other guy. And it feels a little bit rushed just so that we can do this now. And I'm not totally sure why that is. Right away, and there is a really nice escalation to madness throughout this episode from Lex. Watching just this scene, you wouldn't yet think he must have imagined all of that, because we've not yet been to the mansion to see that everything's been cleaned up, and it doesn't seem like what he's talking about really happened. But there is something obviously really off about him. He looks delirious, he looks a little bit like he did. This was also, by the way, directed by Kenneth Miller, which is really impressive. Like I said, I gotta give the man credit. I like a whole lot about this episode, and I love it tonally, if nothing else. And I've got to give him props as the director of the episode for creating so much of the tension here and so much of the general tragic and broody ambiance. But yeah, Lex looks a little crazed, and he's going to look more and more crazed as it goes along because he is being drugged, spoiler alert, and he's descending further and further into madness because of that, partly because of the drugs and partly because he doesn't know what to believe anymore. He's going to get to a place where he doesn't know if he even trusts his own eyes and his own perception of things. But what I was going to say a minute ago is he's acting a little bit like he did when he thought he had malaria. Or did he actually have malaria on that island toward the beginning of the season? And that's going to get brought up again a little bit later. And that's one of the big things that's supposed to make us think that maybe he really is losing his mind, because we saw him in an absolute crazed and delirious state where he was hallucinating toward the beginning of the episode. We've got Clark playing the investigator here, and for Clark, he's smart enough about it. I really like the dilemma he's put in this episode, where he's trying to decide if his friend has lost his mind or not, but he wants to help him regardless, and how exactly do you go about doing that without putting other people in danger? And that's going to be the big problem that he gets into with Lana, although I don't like the way she reacts to it. And of course, we'll get there. Clark is starting to get a little bit, I'll say, smoother at these kinds of situations where Lex has rubbed off on him a little bit, and he's also learned, and when I say these situations, I mean when he has to kind of put on an act and create diversions or pretend like he's at places for different reasons in order to and create a distraction in order to do something like he did there, where he's picking up a piece of evidence. Like, he's getting better at sleuthing. He's getting better at the scuba gang thing. And he has also learned a lot from his experiences on Red Kryptonite, and a little bit later, he's going to go just right into that mode, and not while he was on Red Kryptonite. And I like that a lot, and I like to see, I wish we saw him doing more of that kind of thing. He's really proactive this episode. He's got a lot of ingenuity this episode. He takes risks, and he doesn't get he doesn't stall out and freeze up as soon as things don't go his way. And he's a lot more likable here than usual. And I think some of that in Biller's script might just be, it's easier to write character-driven when the stakes are so personal. When you're not just plugging in for a formula. I do think there is a little bit of, we've decided in the writer's room that these certain things have to happen by this point, so we're going to kind of force characters into those areas, even if it doesn't necessarily make sense or feel like what they would do to get there. And I'm pretty much this episode just talking about Lana with that. But besides that, like, this is not an episode that feels like we just outlined everything and characters are doing things because that's where we decided we were going to get to now. And again, I think that's easier to do when it's all about, when Clark is trying to save somebody that he cares about, as opposed to dealing with yet another Kryptofreak and trying to save people that he doesn't know anything about. And that's not to say that you can't maintain that. That's not sustainable. That's not to say that every episode should be like that. But I think these episodes, ironically, even though they're larger and the stakes for the audience are higher, and you might think that would make it harder to stick the landing, I think these things are probably easier to write for this staff. So Lionel shows up on the farm, and he says that Lex has had a psychotic break. John Glover's amazing as always. I like how he pretends like it's difficult for him to say what has happened. He repeats, Lex has had a psychotic break. He'll go, a psychotic break. Lex has had a psychotic break. And you buy it that something has seriously happened to Lex, and that that Lionel is sincerely, I love that line delivery, that Lionel is is genuinely worried for his well-being. And there is also a little bit of truth to that. I think there's usually a grain of truth to things that Lionel says, even when he is bold-faced lying. And we're going to find out at the end of this that in some twisted way he does really care about Lex, or he cares about the fact that he has a son and what he wishes his son would be. All throughout the show, you have to wonder how much he really cares about Lex and how much of it is just about his legacy and what he's hoping to leave behind. It is very perverse and very twisted. But there is like this little shred of humanity in the fact that, again, this sounds messed up. There's a little shred of humanity in the sense that he doesn't straight up kill Lex when he knows that he's got this damning evidence that could put him in prison. Instead, he concocts this elaborate scheme to make to put Lex in an institution so that nobody will believe anything he says. And it's messed up, but if he didn't care at all about his kid, maybe he would just pull the trigger. This is the first sense that we get that Lex is really starting to lose it. And he picks up a blanket and pretends like it's his brother Julian. And Julian has been mentioned, I believe, earlier, and I'm sure I've talked about this, but it's been a little while. It is clear to me that the producers of the show didn't exactly know what the Luthor family tree was by this point. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of retconning and retroactive stuff later on when we get into Tess Mercer and stuff years from now. But even before this, if Julian is a thing, if he was Lex's, and I forget when exactly he's mentioned first, but if Julian was Lex's full-blooded brother that died as a baby, I have a hard time buying that the kid that is in the locket is his other half-brother that he didn't know he had, that in Season 2, Rachel Dunleavy pretends is Clark, or rather thinks is Clark. I would have thought that Julian would be the kid in the locket. So some of that seems to be kind of retroactive. We are pretty consistent with this episode moving on. We're learning a little bit, and again, some of this feels a little bit retroactive, but I like it a lot, where we find out that Lex blames himself for the death of Julian, of the baby, and that was super traumatic for him, so that's immediately where his mind goes, and when he is losing it. And we haven't been told that yet, because of course he's not talking about it, and it's you know, this deep, horrible personal thing for him that he blames himself for. And when we find out later on what actually happened, and we get that reveal in a flashback, I think that's also one of the best episodes of the season, and I'll be surprised if I don't give that a 3, 5, or a 4. It's a spectacular reveal, and it's really satisfying. So I talked over this great exchange with Clark and Jonathan, where Jonathan is once again upset with Clark for not telling him everything. I think in this case, Clark is, if not totally within his rights not to explain everything to his parents, totally sympathetic, and it's understandable. But I think that everybody's acting like a real person in this episode, save Lana. I think that, and that's not just me throwing Lana under the bus because I genuinely hate her. This is yet another episode where we just don't know what to do with her, and we throw her under the bus for the sake of easy drama. And I'm not talking about that until we get to it. But here, I understand Clark's side, I understand Jonathan's side. I think they both have an argument. From Clark's side, it's, I can't tell you about Lex because he came to me in confidence and he needed a friend, and the more people know, the more people are in danger. And from Jonathan's side, it's, well, we have rules in this house, and when crazy stuff happens, and it's on our lawn especially, I need to know about it. I'm going to count this as walking away angry later. I don't know if it really should count, but Lex is clearly angry, and he's walking away even though he's walking away with Clark. So it's not exactly what I'm usually talking about when I say that, but I think that does sort of count. That does not strike me as an easy drama thing. It doesn't strike me as Clark just leaving so that we can have kind of a teenage rebellion thing. He genuinely wants to help his friend, and he's taking a big risk by doing it. I like that a lot. Like I said, I think everything he does in this episode is really understandable, and even when he starts to maybe blame himself a little bit later, because he's not sure if what he's done is going to lead to the best outcome, and he starts to think that Lionel is right, and he starts to second-guess Lex. That's also totally understandable. He does not know who to believe, and it's really tough to know what to do there, and he's got good arguments on both sides. And that does seem to be one of those situations where this is not a moral issue as much as it's just, I want to make the right strategic move, and so however it turns out is really the thing that matters most. It does start to look like an ends means thing. This is a really elaborate scheme on Lionel's part, but we know he's capable of this kind of thing. He did, level 3 and all of that. So I certainly buy this. I should also mention that I think that that part of the point of doing this episode, there is certainly a novelty to this, is to get to see what a lunatic Lex Luthor would look like before we get him there, and before he turns into an evil man. And it could have been a lot more of a throwaway episode. We could have done that in a Kryptofreak way. And we actually will do that later with Black Kryptonite, when we split him off and we get a good Lex and an evil Lex. So we basically have two-dimensional comic book Lex, and we get to play with that a little bit. That is certainly more gimmicky than this, although I like that episode. One of the most insane things with a commercial break in the history of television happens in that. I can't wait to get there and talk about that when we do. But, anyway, with this, we've got an episode that does matter and is going to stick. It is, of course, going to turn out that he has not actually lost his mind, and that it is drug-induced. And that does seem like, at face value, just an excuse to do this premise, just to get to see this happen. But it does have more consequences than this kind of thing usually does. We are going to, in the next episode, have to kind of cheat a little bit so that he doesn't remember that Clark had powers. It's been a while, and I haven't gone back and watched that episode again yet, so I can't remember if we do that through amnesia, or if he remembers it but doesn't believe that it happened because of all of the hallucinations he's having through this. I hope it's that second thing, because that's better. I just don't remember right off. But I do like that this is part of a larger arc, and that this does tell us just how far Lionel is willing to go. Like, it tells us almost more about Lionel than it does about Lex. But it does feel like a stepping stone to Lex's ultimate unraveling and going down the wrong path, right? Where just going through this makes him see a part of himself that he doesn't like and that he doesn't want to believe that he has, and adds to the trauma, adds to the insanity of his life. This is one of the worst things Lionel ever does to him, and I think that's really important on his road to villainy. I love how desperate he plays this. Rosenbaum really gets to let himself go here. In the chapter on this episode in the Smallville Season 3 official companion, it's mentioned that Rosenbaum, between shooting days, didn't sleep hardly at all, because he wanted to stay in the headspace of this character, and I imagine, it doesn't talk about this, but that sleep deprivation probably helps him to get to this place. The less sleep you have, the more crazed and insane you seem, and it's got to be easier to play this when you haven't had a whole lot of rest. So, the Smallville stable sign is hilarious to me because it looks like it's colored in with, like, Crayola markers. And here comes Lana, because we haven't seen her this episode, and we gotta make sure, because she's a main character, that we throw her in here somewhere. And what are we gonna do with her? Well, I initially don't mind it. Clark brings her in, and he says, I need you to babysit Lex, because he needs help, and he's losing his mind. I don't know what to do. And look, he's this really sad, pathetic, cowering guy right now. He's not acting anything like himself. And he needs a woman's touch. I'm gonna need some. He doesn't say that. I'm gonna need some help with my friend here. And he's like, I'm sorry. I promised I wouldn't put you in any more danger. That's why we're not dating anymore. But I didn't know who else to call. I need some help. Now he could have called Chloe. I suppose, but he brought him to the stables because that was a place he knew nobody would look for him, I guess, and a place that he just had in his back pocket. And Lana has access to that. She's allowed to go there. So I guess in that way it makes sense, but it's pretty much just here to, again, contrive a situation so that she can indeed get put in danger again, because we got to make sure that we put her in a hospital bed even in an episode without a Freak of the Week. And this way we can build up this irritating drama to create a new status quo for their relationship, where we are manufacturing this this dissension where we begin with, well, maybe we're dating, and then we get to, I can't date you anymore because I don't want you in danger, to, oh, Clark, you're right, I do get in danger every time I'm around you, so I can't, I don't want to be around you anymore. I guess Clark doesn't call Chloe in that case because she's investigating this. So I guess that makes sense. But yeah, we'll see that a little bit later, but it just seems like a really weird reaction where she's not blaming Clark in that she thinks that it's intentionally his fault, but she's kind of doing the stupid fate thing again, where it's like, oh yeah, I've become superstitious that anytime I'm around Clark Kent, just like he said, I'm in danger. And this is a really extenuating circumstance. If this was more of a Kryptofreak kind of situation, if it had anything to do with what appear to be Clark's superpowers, with his not telling the truth, or his being able to do something that he refuses to talk about that he's able to do, I would understand it more. But it's literally shooting the messenger. Or not literally, because she doesn't have a gun and she doesn't actually shoot anyone. But it's like it's shooting the messenger. Clark only brought her here because Lex needed help. Lex is the one who has put everyone in danger I mean, it's not Lex's fault, it's Lionel's fault, but I mean, like, it's Lex's presence that's putting everybody in danger. If anything, she should wake up and say, oh man, I'm in danger when Lex is around, or at least it seems like we're all mixed up in this really horrifying situation that maybe we shouldn't be. She's also not really smart to bring him tea like that. I think she knows, maybe she's not fully been briefed on the situation, and if that's the case, I do blame Clark. But if the idea is supposed to be she's been told that, and by the way, she gets trampled so many times by that horse that she should have a broken leg, and it's gonna, or at least, if not a fractured spine, and she's gonna look at that. Look at the way her leg is twisted. Like, she should be in a wheelchair for the rest of the season, seriously. But people get around stuff like that in the show very easily. One thing we're not counting that we should be is people getting thrown up against walls. I may start just mentioning it, because it happens a whole lot. There's all these like massive injuries that should happen to people, but they just get up and walk away. No problem at all. But yeah, I don't buy that that's necessarily her reaction. I mean, I guess I do in the sense that Lana has been a consistently inconsistent character, and that she is pretty selfish, and she does tend to go to the most like dramatic place possible. I also could have seen just some escalation there, where she wakes up and says like, "Wow, Clark, like maybe you're right, maybe you're onto something," but to just immediately jump to, I had better stay away from you. With this situation, I just think it's really extenuating. One of my favorite Lionel Luthor moments in the series is also in this scene, when he just breaks down and yells at Clark and stops everything and basically says enough is enough. And again, he's such a good actor, both John Glover and the character, because of course, once again, Lionel is acting. He is blaming Clark for Lex getting lost and for not bringing him to Lionel in the first place. That's great. His no there, it's fantastic. He's so good at making everybody believe, like, even though nobody trusts him, that's such a believable performance, again, from Lionel's, from Lionel, not just from John Glover, where that is a performance, because he knows what he's done, of course. He knows that he's drugged Lex, and, I mean, I guess he's not having to act that hard, because, like, he's pretending like he has nothing to do with this, but he also is angry, because he has lost Lex and he doesn't know where he is. But at the same time, he doesn't have all that much to worry about right now, because Lex does seem to be losing his mind. So if he tries to bring that evidence to anybody right now, they're probably not going to believe him, so he's already won. But he doesn't want Lex running around causing problems. He wants him in a mental institution, especially because Lex is liable to take out all of his anger and fear out on Lionel. So part of the reason he would want Lex found right now is self-preservation. So Clark here is going to go back to Red Kryptonite Clark on purpose. He doesn't even have to put on the ring in order to do it. And I think in this particular case, that's kind of a smart way for him to go. And I don't know why he doesn't do this more often. I guess, of course, I don't want to see Superman constantly strong-arming people. In this particular instance, he's desperate to find out where his friend is. But I think this is kind of a smart move. And, of course, he's bluffing. He's not Jack Bauer in this scene. He's not going to actually break the guy's arm or anything. And he's playing it like he's in complete control. This isn't... I mean, like I said, he's desperate to find his friend, but he's not so desperate that I'm thinking he's like Batman and Dark Knight, where he's going to drop a guy from 12 feet and break his kneecap or something. You give him a broken leg. And here comes the coolest scene maybe in Smallville history for Michael Rosenbaum. I kind of just want to sit here and watch it, but I know some of you guys probably aren't actually watching the episode, so I will continue to meander along so that you have something to listen to in your car or while you're mowing the lawn. So, I love that that delivery, how you and Morgan Edge killed my grandparents. He is... Let's do the whole thing on Oprah. There's this bit here when he says that where that reaction from John Glover could very well be just what he thinks Lionel would do there. That smile, that kind of smirk. It also could be him losing character just a little bit, because it is really funny. This is the epitome of a disturbing, intense scene that is also remarkably entertaining and very funny. Because of, but like, twistedly funny. It's really only funny if you're thinking about the production side of it, I think, because I'm getting to see some of the real Rosenbaum here. Rosenbaum's such a great actor that he loses himself whenever he plays Lex, which is really interesting, because he's a guy that these days doesn't really like to act that much. And I think he's brilliant at it. He wants to produce and direct now, and I don't think he's as good at that. I think he's an absolute brilliant character actor. And he, and just actor. And sort of like Brent Spiner in TNG, whenever he would be allowed to play a different character, or Data would be mind-controlled or something, and he had to act differently, you'd see some of the more whimsical, kind of sarcastic Spiner come out. And we see that here with Rosenbaum. We see some of his more natural comedic sensibilities. And you see just how reserved for Rosenbaum Lex has been. I'll go as far as to say that he could have been a more Jim Carrey-like comedian, I think. Obviously, it would have been very different from Jim Carrey, but if he did more, like, over-the-top, mask-like roles, that's the kind of performance you would have seen from him, and I think he would have been great at that. Look, we have a better close-up of Smallville Stables. It's like they put that up there just before they started recording, and it looks pretty silly. So here are these snipers again. Like I said, I really like that Clark kind of got something out of going to Metropolis, and of course he's going to pretend with Morgan Edge like he's still kind of that guy. Or at least he would if immediately we didn't have Green Kryptonite, and this is one of those instances where we're gonna do the really obvious thing. We're gonna bring Kryptonite in the mix, so that Clark is not super powerful and can't take care of the situation in 6 seconds flat. But it makes sense that he would be carrying that. A lot tighter continuity this season. We are going to retcon some stuff from previous seasons and previous episodes, but we've got, I think, a much better sense of what kind of show we want to be, while, again, occasionally interrupting ourselves with more traditional early Smallville episodes. And this is not the kind of show, as I've said before, that you would think you would get with a Superman show, or that maybe I would even really want. Like, we've got a lot of corporate espionage stuff, we've got a lot of crime drama this season, and the show likes to be a horror thing. There's that weird bit I talked over earlier when we were in the barn when Clark pops up and freaks out Lana. Is that supposed to be like a jump scare or something? Like, why did we shoot it like that? Where she goes, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you." And it's like, I don't even know why we did that. It's like the show, just as often as possible, wants to feel like kind of a cheap horror thing. But it is managing the kind of pseudo X-Files thing it wants to be a lot better, I think, this season. I think a lot of the show's best episodes are in the second season. Although I'll see by the end of this if I think that they're kind of tied for best episodes, because the more I'm thinking about it, there are a lot of 3.5s, if not 4s, in this season, comparatively. And I just think it's a little bit more, it's getting more tonally consistent more often. And has a little bit more of an identity. This guy is good. He's not Rutger Hauer or anything, and I don't really know him from anything else that I can think of, but this is Patrick Bergen, who is apparently a friend of Rutger Hauer's, and that's part of why they cast him, and also because he has a similar build, so that you could kind of buy that it's the same guy. Amusingly, Birds of Prey will do this before Smallville does, if memory serves, in 2002. Well, yeah, because that show would have been canceled already by now, right? Doesn't that show start in 2002? It must. I'm pretty sure I'm right about that, yeah. And Reese's dad is a big crime boss in that, who also is played by one actor and then later is played by another, and they do this plastic surgery gimmick. So this will also be someone faking their own death, and we'll get to count that. There's Lex with a gun. That's another thing that I've not been counting, or I don't think I have been, that I want to start bringing up now because it comes up constantly. Both Lex getting shot by guns and picking up guns. So, of course, as soon as we see what's about to happen here, where Clark, in order to get out of this situation, is going to have to use his superpowers right in front of Lex, we know right away, okay, some kind of cheat is going to have to happen now. And that's the weakest thing about this episode, is that, and I don't know what you do about it exactly, so maybe this is somewhat unfair, but this is basically going to play like a two-parter. These are two very different episodes that I think do kind of stand on their own, but we're going to end on a cliffhanger where Lex is going to be in an asylum, and in the next episode he's going to try to escape. And between the episodes, we know that Lex during his psychotic break stage has, phase, has seen, okay, so now Morgan Edge is going to die because we know we can't get Rutger Hauer back. But he sees Clark doing something extraordinary, so we're going to have a cheat with that. And there's some bullet time. And it happens over the episode, so we don't know at the end of this how exactly we're going to get out of that, and that has the potential to really deflate some of this if it's done in a really super awfully cheating kind of way. I do love his reaction. And I do also kind of like using that as one of the things that makes Lex himself think that maybe he's lost his mind. I don't like that line, "You're not even human." He has seen Kryptofreaks do extraordinary things. And I don't remember if he has seen anybody with super strength personally. We had the guys with the kryptonite inhalers, and they had super strength. And I don't know. I don't remember if he saw those people or not. But like, Lex is familiar with superpowers, and so for him to say "you're not even human" is kind of ridiculous. It is played as a little bit of a reveal that his psychiatrist, unless we knew already. Again, it's been a little while since I've shot these, but I don't think we knew this already. That she was brought in by Lionel Luthor as part of this conspiracy. That is not a shock. I don't think anybody is surprised by that. And you have to assume that every woman in Lex's life, whether it's a romantic or a platonic relationship or a professional relationship, is probably out to get him in some way, because that just seems to always be the case. So she's going to wake up, and this is going to be the most nausea-inducing scene in the episode for me, where she's going to say, in like the cutest pouty face way possible, I don't think we can. I don't think I can be around you. I think I have to stay away from you. Like, I get that there's a bunch of different situations where she's almost died, and Clark was around, but she's like ignoring all the times that he saved her. Like, there are all kinds of times where Lana was in mortal danger and Clark had nothing to do with it, and if he hadn't shown up, if he didn't know where she was and got there, she'd be dead. But now, because of this one instance where he was the one who called her and she got trampled by a horse because she was dumb enough to hand a guy who thinks he's drugged liquid that he thinks, please, that he thinks, like, anything you hand him, he's going to think might be drugged. She is using that as the opportunity to do the thing that I am convinced is just sitting on a whiteboard in the writer's room. This is the place where she, however we have to get there, where she decides I have to stay away from you. And of course, it's probably not going to stick very long. So we go to Belle Reve Sanitarium. That's going to be used throughout the show now. And we're going to find out next episode that this is where several of the Kryptofreaks that Clark put away have been thrown away. And in other media, or other shows and things, I should say, we pronounce it Belle Rev. And it does only have one E. Like, it does have an E at the end of the word. So that would lead you to believe that it's maybe a long E. But I always thought before I saw this show, whenever I would see that in comics, that it was Belle Rev. And this show says Belle Reve. This is a stretch, but they might be thinking Christopher Reeve when they pronounce it that way. But of course, it's not spelled that way. I also really like that. And I believe him when he says that. When he says, this is not what I wanted. Obviously, they've been playing a tete-a-tete game throughout this whole series, and we are at various points supposed to think, I think, that Lionel really doesn't care at all about Lex, that Lex has disappointed him, that he's not the person he wants him to be, and if he had it his way, he would just get rid of him and move on. Here, we're getting the sense that that is, in fact, not the case, and he does genuinely, in his own, again, twisted way, he does have feelings for his son, and the thing he cares most about is legacy, and that's why he has children in the first place. And it's just a really messed up father-son story in comparison to Clark and Jonathan, and I like it a lot. So I think it's... I meant to mention this earlier. I do think it's a little bit of a misstep to tell us this episode. That is a thing that I think we should have left to the next episode. There's some slow motion walking in hospitals. We do that a lot in the show too. I could be counting that. The biggest one is in Ryan, but we do that in a lot of different episodes. But I think it is kind of a mistake to tell us that it is not an actual psychotic break and that it actually is is drug induced and that Lionel did it this early over the episode. I think it's a lot more interesting to stay with Clark and Lex on that for as long as humanly possible. This was also, and credits, this was also the thing that got me really into Johnny Cash. Of course, I had listened to Johnny Cash growing up a little bit. I knew who he was, what his music sounded like, but that song just hit me in a place like it did with a lot of people, and this was my introduction to it. And I sought it out immediately. The scene at the end in the asylum where Lionel is looking at Lex through the one-way glass, and Lex probably doesn't know that he's there and is just in his own head thinking he's lost his mind, is really provocative. It's one of the greatest images of the show, I think. And again, I think it would have been sadder if somehow or rather Lex could have really lost his mind and then maybe gotten it back somehow. I don't know exactly how you do that without it being really super gimmicky or without having to spend a whole half a season or a whole season on it. I think in having to do this in a basically episodic sort of way or in just a couple of episodes, it's handled as well as it could be. And I don't know, man. I love that image at the end, if nothing else, that like this man has done this to his son and sees it as entirely necessary because like he creates every problem for himself and he creates a whole lot of problems for a whole lot of other people. But that like in his own twisted way, he's a good father for doing this instead of what he could do, what he would do to anybody else, which is just kill them. Where you're having to kind of get into the mind of a psychopath or at least a sociopath, while ironically he is pretending like his son is a psychopath, and it's messed up and it's wonderful. But it's also a surprisingly really entertaining episode. Anyway, it's overall just wonderful. So let's go ahead and go on now to the count. We have no Kryptofreaks this episode because it's just not that kind of episode. And then hilariously, the follow-up, the second part, is going to have like 3. So we have one character who's not himself, of course. That is Lex, who thinks he's losing his mind. Morgan Edge has faked his death. We have one of those, and Morgan Edge is now dead. So he really is just a plot device for this episode so that we have some kind of evidence against Lionel. We've got an instance of Lex getting shot. We have an instance of Lex with a gun. I'm going to start mentioning those. We have, like I said, I'm going to count that one bit with Lex and Clark walking away from Jonathan and Martha as walking away angry, even though it's not exactly what that usually is. We've got one instance of Clark getting affected by Green Kryptonite, with all the little balls of Kryptonite bouncing around on the floor. We got one instance of bullet time, and we have even a rude super speed exit. This is an excellent episode for the most part, with a whole bunch of stuff to count. I am really back and forth on the rating on this episode. I think I have to go with a 4. I was really between a 3.5 and a 4 on this. It has the couple of problems I mentioned, the biggest thing being Alana, but I think relative to the rest of the show, and that's how I really have to score this, I'm afraid that if this doesn't get a 4, other things would not make sense if they end up getting 4s. And of course, I can't like perfectly relate every episode to another, where like it's really hard to be consistent about that. It's like, well, if this got a 3.5, how come this other thing got a 4? But I am thinking that with this because it's at the very least one of my favorite episodes and has one of the best performances in the show. And so, if I pit it up against another series, it probably isn't getting quite to a 4. But for this show, right, this is one of the 4s of this show, I think. So I think, I don't know, I think I'm going to have to give it a 4. Thanks a lot for watching, everybody. Really hope you enjoyed my incessant ramblings while watching Shattered. And amusingly, and I don't remember, I should have looked this up, I'm not sure who wrote the episode I'm about to bring up, but there is also an episode, which is also a good episode, but not the same kind of good, in Voyager, which was, like I said, show ran by Kenneth Biller in the 7th season, and Kenneth Biller was one of the producers on that show. I think all the way through, he certainly was one of the main staff writers on that show. He wrote a lot of its worst episodes, or at least not good episodes, and he wrote a couple of okay things. But there was an episode in season 7, I think it's 7, while he's show running, called Shattered, and that's the episode where all the different parts of the ship are like different time periods from the show. So like you're time traveling when you walk from one part of the ship to another, and only Chakotay realizes it. And it's one of Chakotay's best episodes, which is sad because we never do enough with him. But I think it's really amusing that Kenneth Biller wrote this, and one of the best episodes on his watch during a period of not good stuff. Like I said, I'm pretty sure that's season 7. Was called Shattered. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, folks. Sure appreciate it. Leave your comments, and I am Captain Logan, and consider this episode counted.